The Fluoride Deception. Chapter 17. The Damage is Done. Behind a cluttered desk at the Newburgh Free Academy, under a portrait of Coretta Scott King, nurse practitioner Audrey Carey daily performs physical exams on students at the large public school, which has 2,500 children in grades 10 through 12. The former mayor is in a unique position to see some of the health effects from her community's long experiment of adding fluoride to water supplies. 50 years earlier, Dr. Harold Hodge had assured local citizens that the Newburgh experiment had proved water fluoridation safe and had urged it upon the entire country.
Health hazards do not justify postponing water fluoridation,
he had told Congress in 1954. The Hudson Valley town quickly became the poster child for a global sales effort. Newburgh's smiling youngsters were paraded before scientists from the United Kingdom, New Zealand, and the World Health Organization. And for 6 days in 1963, Dr. Hodge sang Newburgh's praises before the Supreme Court in Dublin, prescribing mandatory fluoridation for Ireland. Ireland and several other countries swallowed his story. But today, back in Newburgh, Audrey Carey is no longer certain. The most visible effects from fluoride in Newburgh water are not fewer cavities, but instead the high rates of speckled and mottled teeth. Carey's friends and family, among many others in the community, have this condition, which is known as dental fluorosis. And after 50 years, Newburgh children have virtually the same amount of dental decay as their counterparts in the neighboring town of Kingston, which was the control city in the original experiment. Kingston has resisted all efforts in subsequent years to add fluoride to its water supply. But following Newburgh's fluoridation, the rate of fluorosis was always higher there than in Kingston, and during the 1990s, it rose again. Fluorosis also occurs more frequently in African American children, according to recent surveys done by the New York Department of Health.
I see the modeling that occurs mainly in poor children,
Carey told me. She also sees it in her own family. Both her grandchildren have dental fluorosis. Although their mother is now very careful in reading the products she buys to make sure that there is no fluoride, Carey believes that the damage is done.
Medically, it looks very bad for them,
she says.
I am not sure what other physical effects they may have, or defects for that matter.
Newburgh's legacy of mottled teeth is shared by much of the rest of the country. Today, many dentists face a disturbing dilemma. Dental decay is still a serious and painful problem, especially in the inner city and even in fluoridated areas, where children are often trapped in a crossfire of poverty, poor nutrition, and a woeful public provision of dental care. In some American cities, as many as 3 out of every 4 children have dental fluorosis, and simply adding fluoride to public water supplies may have reached the end of the road as an easy proposal for fixing bad teeth. The dental researcher Dr. Hardy Lineback of the University of Toronto in Canada is so concerned about the dangers of fluorosis that he claims fluoride toothpaste should be a prescription drug, at least until a child can spit after the age of 3. And even spitting is not foolproof. Fluoride is absorbed directly into the body through the oral mucosa, notes Lineback. Poor nutrition can also raise the likelihood of dental fluorosis, and if there is fluoride in the water supply, fluoride toothpaste may further increase the jeopardy.
Physicians have to get involved,
Lineback insists.
Before prescribing fluoride toothpaste, you have to figure out, is this kid at risk for dental fluorosis? Better food, regular brushing and flossing, access to a dentist, and using non-fluoride toothpaste may be required. You can get perfectly healthy teeth with resistant enamel without having any kind of fluoride exposure,
notes Lineback. His son has dental fluorosis, and Lineback no longer keeps fluoride toothpaste in his home. Newburgh Mayor Carey's concern that dental fluorosis may signal more serious health problems is also warranted. We are now bathed in fluoride from cradle to grave, from industrial, dental, and a multitude of other and sometimes unexpected sources. But the health implications of such long-term fluoride ingestion remain woefully under-examined.
Dental fluorosis is a biomarker for systemic fluoride poisoning during early childhood,
notes Dr. Lineback.
Teeth are windows to the rest of the body,
adds Paul Connett, a chemistry professor and anti-fluoride campaigner at St. Lawrence University in New York, who likens the symptomatic nature of dental fluorosis to the thin blue gum line that can indicate lead poisoning. Yet when scientists peer behind the polished facade of row upon row of brilliantly shining teeth to explore whether fluoride may be injuring us in other ways, they often get a rude surprise. In 1992, Dr. Joseph Lyon of the University of Utah co-authored a study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, which found that water fluoridation was associated with an increased risk of hip fracture. He was stunned at the lack of interest shown by U.S. public health agencies in the study's results, and he has since found it difficult to get additional funding to further research this issue, he says. Today, the United States has one of the highest rates of hip fracture in the world and is witnessing an epidemic of arthritis in 21 million Americans. Yet doctors are as likely to blame fluoride as flying saucers.
My sense is there has been very little attention paid to toxicity,
said Dr. Lyon.
Almost on the grounds that it is an impossibility, and it is a waste of everybody's time and money to even think about it.
Subsequent studies have found similar associations between fluoride in water and bone fractures. It is not just the elderly who are at risk. Fluoride may be weakening young people's bones as well. In 2001, a study in Mexico reported that dental fluorosis was correlated with a higher incidence of bone fractures in children. In the United States, we now pay an annual $500 million hospital tab as a result of 775,000 childhood sports injuries. Although more young people are now playing sports, particularly girls, who have a high incidence of knee and ankle injuries, Dr. Lyon wonders whether the white, chalky blotches seen on teeth also predict the likelihood of a juvenile sports injury. Is there some association between childhood sporting injury and living in a fluoridated area? He asked. There would be a plausible physiologic basis for it. The assurances that drinking fluoride for a lifetime would be harmless flowed strongest from Dr. Hodge's Cold War laboratory at the University of Rochester. In 1954, he had poured oil on the troubled waters of the growing citizens' movement opposing fluoridation, telling Congress that it would require ingesting 80 milligrams of fluoride each day for 10 to 20 years before injury would occur. After hearing Hodge, Congress rejected the appeals to ban water fluoridation. In the late 1980s, however, two anti-fluoride activists, Martha Bevis and Darlene Sherrill, questioned the data Hodge had given Congress. By then, Hodge's numbers had mutated further and were now being draped by fluoride promoters over all possible adverse chronic health effects. The American Dental Association, ADA, stated in a pamphlet that
the daily intake required to produce symptoms of chronic toxicity after years of consumption is 20 to 80 milligrams or more, depending on weight.
It was a plain falsehood. Sherrill wrote to the National Academy of Sciences, NAS, asking where the numbers had come from. This dogged researcher spotted that even Hodge had changed his data. Hodge stated in 1979 that 10 AGs of fluoride a day, not 20, would cause crippling fluorosis. Hodge had given no accompanying explanation for why he had halved his estimate. In any case, the government and the ADA ignored Hodge's correction. They continued to use his higher estimate of the amount of fluoride one could safely consume in a day, even though Hodge himself had repudiated it. It was only with the help of Florida's Senator Bob Graham that Sherrill won a response in 1990 from the NAS, to whom she pointed out the error. The persistence of the citizen activist paid off. 3 years later, in 1993, the NAS National Research Council, NRC, published yet another fluoride report entitled Health Effects of Ingested Fluoride. This time, although there is no accounting or apologizing for the 40 years of false reassurances, the numbers were quietly corrected.
Crippling skeletal fluorosis,
the NRC stated,
might occur in people who have ingested 10 to 20 milligrams of fluoride per day for 10, 20 years.
It was an astonishing state of affairs. Two citizen activists, neither of them scientists, had torn away the flimsy garment that had concealed a half-century of scientific deception. The corrected 1993 NRC figures laid bare the facts. Countless thousands of Americans have been exposed to dangerous levels of fluoride throughout their lives. In particular, the generation of baby boomers who have ingested a lifetime of fluoridated water and might more accurately be called Hodge's generation, may be suffering a variety of musculoskeletal and other health ailments that can be traced back to the toxicologist's false promise that fluoride in water was safe.
The whole thing is bogus,
explained the former EPA and U.S. Army scientist Dr. Robert J. Carton. In 1985, he got a close look at what he calls the dangerous joke at the heart of the government's fluoride policy and the very real likelihood that fluoride is injuring our bones. That year, EPA scientists, including Carton, were asked to set a new and higher national level for the public's permissible exposure to fluoride in drinking water. Until the EPA review, Carton had not been aware the subject was controversial.
"I was just like everybody else,"
said Carton.
"It was a no-brainer. Fluoride is completely safe and effective, all that kind of stuff."
Under Reagan appointee Administrator William Ruckelshaus, EPA senior management had proposed raising the safe permissible level of fluoride in drinking water from 2.3 milligrams to 4 milligrams. They had a simple way of justifying this. The blotchy teeth, dental fluorosis produced by as little as 1 milligram of fluoride per litre, which worsened greatly and grew more brittle at 4 milligrams per litre, were deemed a harmless cosmetic side effect. And despite the voluble protests of Carton, fellow EPA scientist Dr. William Hersey, the Natural Resources Defense Council, and the EPA's employee union, Local 2050 of the National Federation of Federal Employees, the new national standard was approved.
"The EPA got away with it,"
says Carton, but only at the price of embarrassing its staff as professional scientists and jeopardizing the nation's health. As Carton explains it, even according to the EPA's own figures, 3% of the population drink more than 5 litres of water a day. If that water contains 4 milligrams of fluoride, the supposedly safe new standard, then those thirsty people will cross the threshold at which even the EPA admitted severe health effects were likely to occur.
"You basically have a standard that, based on their own information, shows it is going to cause crippling skeletal fluorosis,"
says Carton. Of course, the 1993 revised estimate by the National Academy of Science for how much fluoride can cause crippling skeletal fluorosis is not 20 milligrams, but 10 milligrams. That means that the EPA standard is way off and would permit crippling bone injuries in a very great many people.
"They are really causing problems,"
Carton said. Moreover, the crippling fluorosis estimate specifies a limited time period of 10 to 20 years for crippling fluorosis to appear. But fluoride is a poison that accumulates in the body over a lifetime. What happens when you get 10 milligrams a day for 40 or 60 or even 80 years? In that case, you still reach the levels that cause crippling skeletal fluorosis, but at a later age. This simple consideration was not even addressed in the EPA's new exposure standard, says Carton, now retired.
"None of it makes sense. All you have to do is look at it for 10 seconds and it falls apart,"
he concludes. Bone defects possibly linked to fluoride had been noticed at Newburgh back in 1955, after just 10 years of water fluoridation. A radiologist, Dr. John Caffey of Columbia University, called the defects striking in their similarity to bone cancer. They were detected on X-rays and seen more than twice as frequently among boys in Newburgh as among boys in non-fluoridated Kingston. Caffey's cancer suspicions, however, were not discussed in the 1956 Newburgh final report. In 1977, a National Academy of Sciences panel took a second look at Dr. Caffey's report, which had been published in 1955.
The Newburgh cancer clue had never been followed up,
the experts said.
It would be important to have direct evidence that osteogenic sarcoma rates in males under 30 have not increased with fluoridation,
the panel stated. Also, in 1977, Congress discovered that despite a quarter century of endorsing water fluoridation, Federal health authorities had never cancer tested fluoride. When cancer tests were finally performed 12 years later, it was found that fluoride caused excess bone cancers in young male rats. The government concluded that the results showed equivocal evidence that fluoride was a carcinogen. In truth, fluoride's link to cancer may have been much stronger than authorities conceded. The above-mentioned tests also showed increased liver cancers in rats, but both the bone and liver cancer evidence was systematically downgraded, according to Dr. William Marcus, chief scientist at the EPA's Division of Water Quality. After Dr. Marcus aired those allegations in an interview on ABC News, he was fired for supposedly unrelated reasons. But a federal judge later ruled that Marcus had been terminated because he had publicly questioned and opposed EPA's fluoride policy. The toxicologist was reinstated, and the government was ordered to pay damages. Since then, additional epidemiological studies have found more cancer in fluoridated areas, especially bone cancer in young men. Even the verdict of equivocal carcinogen is disturbing. Maybe fluoride doesn't cause cancer, but maybe it does. Is it worth the risk?
How many cavities would have to be saved to justify the death of one man from osteosarcoma?
Asked the late Dr. John Colquhoun, the former chief dental officer of Auckland, New Zealand, and a fluoride promoter turned critic. Harold Hodge had also reassured American families about fluoride while secretly worrying about the chemical's effects on the central nervous system of nuclear workers. Today, central nervous system illnesses shadow our young and old alike, with an epidemic of attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, in children, and with 4.5 million elderly citizens who are diagnosed with Alzheimer's dementia. The increase in Alzheimer's in the United States is largely attributed to the aging of the population, but environmental causes are also blamed. Does fluoride play a role in causing the disease? Quite possibly. In 1992, the American scientists Robert Isaacson, Julie Varner, and Carl Jensen found that fluoridated water carried aluminum into rat brains, producing Alzheimer's-like changes in brain tissue. Phyllis Mullenix, who gave laboratory mice moderate doses of fluoride and generated symptoms resembling ADHD, fears that the high incidence of both diseases in the general population is direct evidence of fluoride's toxic effects, and that both the number and kind of such injuries may worsen in the coming years.
I think we are going to see a lot more neurological problems that currently have no answers,
Mullenix said.
Extremes of behavioral problems are going to start showing up. There will be more children and people with unexplained convulsions, more unexplained cases of Alzheimer's and that kind of thing.
There were other data on Newberg's health that warranted concern. In the 1956 Newberg final report, researchers noted that young women in Newberg reached puberty at an earlier age than did girls in non-fluoridated Kingston. Laboratory experiments have recently reproduced similar fluoride effects in gerbils. In other words, fluoride has the ability to impact the female reproductive system and may be lowering the age at which women are reaching puberty. And following the introduction of fluoride into city waters, Newberg's heart disease rate was found by researchers to be one of the highest in the United States, another fact missing from the official final report. Heart disease also doubled just 5 years into the nation's other early fluoridation experiment in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Fluoride concentrates in the arteries, attracting calcium, and can contribute directly to their hardening, according to scientists. The folly of adding fluoride to water supplies in a nation so burdened by heart disease would seem obvious. Mayor Carey now sees the 1945 demonstration project in her hometown in a very different light.
The more I read and the more I listen, the more I understand that we were subjected to experimentation,
Carey stated. The newly uncovered Manhattan Project documents about Newberg suggest to Carey that her townspeople were not told the truth about the 1945 fluoride experiment.
What happened to all of the samples that they took from me as a child?
She asked.
Where did they end up? What were they taken for? Certainly it wasn't for preventative health care.
Today, some dentists are shocked to learn that a classic bait and switch was pulled on the public and on health professionals alike regarding the chemicals used in fluoridation. Pure sodium fluoride was used for the early Newburgh and Grand Rapids experiments, but today 90% of fluoridated public water supplies in the United States use not pharmaceutical-grade fluoride, but industrial-grade silicofluoride scrubbed from the smokestacks of the Florida phosphate industry. Important long-term toxicity tests have never been performed on these silicofluorides, although some studies have associated the chemical with higher levels of blood lead in children who live where they are used for fluoridation. Silicofluorides also frequently contain arsenic at levels that may present a risk of cancer, according to data from the National Academy of Sciences.
You are sticking this poison into the water supply, supposedly to prevent dental disease. It is not even doing that, and you are causing cancer just from the arsenic alone. This is totally criminal,
argued the University of Toronto's Dr. Limeback. Even the Paley Commission's long-ago predictions that these silicofluorides produced by the Florida phosphate industry would become an important and valuable source of industrial fluoride have not come to pass. Today, most industrial fluoride used in the United States is the raw mineral fluorspar, now mined and imported from China. For now, absent trouble with the Chinese and with a low price of fluorspar on world markets, silicofluoride waste from the Florida phosphate production is not used as an industrial raw material. Rather, it is collected, billed to the taxpayer, and dumped into public water supplies around the country, all under the guise of protecting children's teeth. Whether a dentifrice, pollution control measure, or Cold War national security blanket, EPA chemist Dr. William Hersey put the loony logic of such dumping of industrial silicofluorides this way.
If this stuff gets out into the air, it's a pollutant. If it gets into the river, it's a pollutant. If it gets into the lake, it's a pollutant. But if it goes right straight into your drinking water system, it's not a pollutant. That's amazing.
While much of the medical profession in the United States remains ignorant about fluoride's potential for harm, there are exceptions. Since 1968, scientists at the International Society for Fluoride Research, ISFR, have catalogued fluoride's impact on human health and the environment. In scores of peer-reviewed papers, their journal Fluoride has linked the chemical to multiple human health effects, including thyroid problems, Down syndrome, arthritis, central nervous system effects, cardiovascular problems, and breathing difficulties. George Woolbot, who founded ISFR, believed that fluoride's ability to wreak such biological havoc was a function of its basic nature. Although the exact mechanism of action was then unknown, Woolbot speculated that fluoride buried deep into different organ systems and then disrupted the numerous chemical systems, such as enzymes, that regulate life. Woolbot may have been right. Enzymes are spectacularly sensitive to fluoride. In files that were only declassified in the mid-1990s, it was revealed that in 1944, Harold Hodges bomb program researchers at the University of Rochester had experimented with hog liver enzymes to measure fluoride pollution in bomb factories. Fluoride was so much more toxic to the esterase enzyme than uranium that contamination by fluoride and uranium could easily be differentiated. And 20 years after George Woolbot's death, scientists may be on the brink of unlocking a crucial cellular mechanism for how fluoride acts on our bodies. That detective story has a disturbing twist. The aluminum industry has spilled a great deal of fluoride into the environment in the last century and has been closely associated with efforts to promote water fluoridation. Ironically, it may be that aluminum combined with fluoride is especially responsible for fluoride's toll on health and the environment. In 1994, the American scientists Alfred G. Gilman and Martin Rodbell won the Nobel Prize for discovering the importance of G proteins in biology. The protein molecules act as biological amplifiers or relay stations, converting information received at a cell's surface and producing changes inside that cell. For example, when we are angry, the adrenal gland produces the adrenaline hormone. When the hormone reaches the liver or the heart, the G protein is activated, telling the organ to produce extra energy. The bad news is that G proteins are easily fooled by aluminum and fluoride, which gang up violently and at a molecular level on our bodies, double teaming for extra effect, according to the Czech scientist Anna Struneka, a researcher at King Charles University in Prague. In an abstract titled Fluoride and Aluminum, Messengers of False Information, Struneka reports,
"It appears probable that we will not find any physiological process which is not potentially influenced by aluminofluorides."
She added,
"The synergistic action of fluoride and aluminum in the environment, water and food can thus evoke multiple pathological symptoms."
The dangers of pumping fluoride and aluminum into our environment and our duties to future generations are clear, according to the scientist.
An awareness of the health risks of this new ecotoxicological phenomena would undoubtedly contribute significantly to reducing the risk of a decrease in intelligence of adults and children, and many other disorders of the 21st century,
noted Struneka. The strange case of the missing debaters. The potential number of fluoride-linked health issues may be enormous, but the willingness of scientists to confront them is not. 50 years of state propaganda have left too many scars and phobias. In the spring of 2001, scientist Tom Webster attempted to organize a debate about water fluoridation and was unable to find anyone willing to speak in defense of the chemical. The Boston University environmental health professor had first grown curious about fluoride in the early 1990s, when his scientist friend Paul Connett had confided that he was worried about the potential negative health effects from small doses of fluoride to which Americans are regularly exposed. At first, Webster himself had been dismissive about the issue of fluoride.
"My knee-jerk reaction was, 'Oh man, what are you getting involved in that stuff for? They're all nuts,'" he said. "But then I stopped myself and I said, 'Well, I actually don't know anything about this.'" All I could remember was the Dr. Strangelove image and the John Birch Society. Their two big issues were to get the U.S. out of the UN and stop water fluoridation. The more I thought about it, the more I thought, here I am in the public health profession. I teach about this stuff and I don't know anything about fluoride,
he remembers.
It turns out there is a huge literature on this, which I would never have guessed a couple of years ago.
The professor was baffled. He did not know what to make of the gulf between the nice things the government said about fluoride and the worries of scientists such as Paul Connett. He was especially perturbed by a study he read by a Dr. Phyllis Mullenix showing central nervous system effects in rats.
"Is this bad?"
he said.
My gut reaction was that I don't really like the sound of this.
So Webster scheduled the fluoridation debate. He had joined a new group called the Association for Science in the Public Interest, ACP. The members were all professional scientists who had grown concerned that research was too often disconnected from the public interest. Now, as he scrambled to organize a debate at the group's first national conference in May 2001, Webster was scratching his head. Phone call after phone call, letter after letter, he got the same bang-door rejection from pro-fluoridationists. He felt that many of their dismissals had a mechanical Stepford wife similarity that almost sounded as if they were reading from a common script. Several respondents had even been quite rude.
I got a couple of really obnoxious replies like, "How dare you even hold such an event? It's really unprofessional." One of those was from a guy at the CDC, one of the big fluoridation guys,
said Webster.
It reminded me of the kind of stuff that you read about. Advice to dentists on why they should never debate anti-fluoridationists. It was that kind of thing.
There were even whispers from his own group. A generation gap divided scientists, he realized.
One or two people inside the organization said, "We really shouldn't have a thing on fluoride. It will give us a bad image,"
said Webster. While the younger researchers were willing to host the fluoride debate, Webster found that older members were gun-shy as a result of the painful experiences many scientists and health professionals had undergone in the 1950s and 1960s.
It is our older colleagues who remember that stuff and how bad it was and say, "This is just poison for your career,"
said Webster.
"This is an old battle from the 50s.
Even liberals in his organization shied from hosting the 2001 debate.
It wasn't about science. It was about the politics,
Webster said.
Activist scientists already have a hard enough time in this world. Industry is trying to kill us, and it is hard to survive in academia. This is like, why push beans up your nose?
The May 2001 debate in Virginia finally took place and was well attended, despite the lack of any pro-fluoridation speakers, said Webster. His friend Paul Connett spoke.
Most people did not know that there was an issue. Fluoride is just not on the radar screen. If people like Connett are crazy, I would have loved to see the CDC people come and squash them like a bug. There seems to be almost a taboo about discussing this subject, and that really doesn't seem right in public health.
Tom Webster is not alone in his frustration. That same year, in the fall of 2001, a second scientists' organization, the American College of Toxicology, hosted a great debate on water fluoridation at its annual Washington, D.C. conference. Phyllis Mullenix was a speaker. Again, no one from the pro-fluoride side would speak. The president of the organization, Robert E. Osterberg, had given the debate organizer many names and telephone numbers of scientists at leading drug companies. He was astonished that none of them showed up.
I find it extremely difficult to believe,
said Dr. Osterberg,
that companies that make hundreds of thousands of dollars a year by putting fluoride into kids' multiple vitamins wouldn't stand up there and justify why they are doing it, and answer any concerns that people may have.